Can
you move the motion?
I move the motion on behalf of the Sinn Fein TDs. Workers and families are in the grip of a cost of living crisis. Low and middle income households needed actions that met the scale of those challenges, and a government that understood the challenge they faced, a government that responded to support them. But as we know, this government doesn't get it and failed to meet that challenge. The package announced last week will see the government ministers receiving the same financial support to heat and light their homes as a worker on the minimum wage. That's crazy. This government will spend over €12 million on electricity credits to more than 62,000 holiday homes throughout the state, while low and middle income households face price spikes in the cost of gas, electricity and home heating oil. This is a government that is out of touch, out of ideas and out of time. A Sinn Féin government would have provided targeted support to low and middle income households at speed and at scale. This government has failed to respond to the challenge. The failure is no more evident than in the area of housing. This Dáil and this government should be constantly reminded that the housing and rental crisis did not fall from the sky. It didn't happen by accident, but as a direct consequences of the policies and decisions made by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael elected representatives. Ministers, some of whom have been at the cabinet table now for over a decade, often comment on the housing crisis as if they're some type of spectator. But they are key players in the housing crisis, and you can't spin reality. In the 12 months to November, house prices rose by 14%, and we are close to reaching what I believe is the objective and has been the objective of this government for the past decade, and that is to push house prices back up to Celtic Tiger peaks, to pump up the housing market, to maximise its proceeds for shareholders, developers and institutional investors. And the problem that the government now faces is that that policy has now damaged the quality of life and life prospects of renters while locking workers and families out of home ownership. The average rent now stands across the state at €1,500, and in Dublin it stands at over €2,000. And that is the legacy of this government. Indeed, Minister Donoghue, that is your legacy as Minister for Finance. Renters struggling in this city and right across the state. Saving for a deposit while paying extortionate rent is impossible, while house prices seem so far beyond the reach of many. The October budget, like the measures announced last week, ignored and forgot the struggles of renters. Sinn Féin have called for rents to be reduced and then frozen. A Sinn Féin government would introduce a refundable tax credit for renters, putting 1 month's rent back into their pockets. And a Sinn Féin government would ban rent increases, because renters cannot afford another rent increase. While the government continue to ignore the struggle of renters and home buyers, on the other hand, they roll out the red carpet to institutional investors, to these vulture funds and cuckoo funds, providing them with tax advantages that encourage them to price home buyers out of the market and to push up rents. They pay no corporation tax on their rental profits. They pay no capital gains tax when they sell the property. And they are the winners of government policy, while renters and home buyers are certainly the losers. In 2019, real estate funds enjoyed an operating profit of €1.2 billion. And they did not pay a cent in corporation tax on those profits. And that's not a mistake, as someone has said. Real estate funds in 2019 enjoyed an operating profit of €1.2 billion, and they didn't pay a cent of corporation tax on those profits. In the first half of last year, IRES REIT, which owns over 3,800 properties across the state, made profits of €27 million. They didn't pay a red cent of corporation tax on any of those profits. Profits that were made on the back of renters paying sky-high rents. Now, for years, Sinn Féin have warned this government, have warned this minister across the table that the sweetheart tax deals that he granted these funds would undermine the efforts and interests of renters and of buyers. And that has come to pass, Minister. And now is the time for change. It is long overdue. So this motion before this House tonight calls on the government once again to end the tax advantage that they deliberately gift to the investment funds in the housing market, and instead fund and empower local authorities and home buyers to purchase homes that can be bought or rented at affordable prices. That is what a Sinn Fein government do. And even at this late stage, that is what Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael should do. Roll up the red carpet and stop allowing these funds to pay no tax.
Thank you, Minister, institutional investors are distorting our housing market. And this isn't some accident or force of nature. It is the policy of your government. For many years, there has been a global wall of cheap money seeking out the highest yields in real estate investment. And what government policy has done in recent years is thrown fuel on the housing fire with all of the obvious consequences. My colleague Pearse Doherty has talked about how there's no tax on the rent roll for these funds, no tax on capital gains, and in fact, in many cases, they can write off their dividend withholding tax against other costs. And at the same time, we have inferior design standards for apartments. Why renters should have any less of a standard than buyers is beyond me. But we're also seeing increasingly poor decisions by developers, by the board, challenged in the courts with further delays. And the consequence? House prices rise, rents rise, buyers are locked out of the market, and the housing crisis goes on and on and on. And the measures that you took last year simply make no difference. The idea that an increase of 8% stamp duty would make it more difficult for funds to buy houses and duplexes ignores what's happening with rents. And of course, we remind you time and time again that apartments are also homes, and what we really need here is to price these high-yield short-term investors out of the market and replace them with public investment, with good quality private sector investment to deliver genuinely affordable homes for working people. The Minister will, of course, wrongly say that Sinn Féin is against private sector investment in the market. That is not the case. What we are against is the bad investments that are pushing up house prices, locking families out of home ownership and making the delivery of social and affordable homes ever more difficult. And the motion before us today presents very clear policy alternatives. Because ultimately, Minister, it's time to make a choice. Are you on the side of small numbers of poorly regulated institutional investors to make maximum profits? Or are you on the side of the delivery of genuinely affordable homes for working people to rent or buy at prices they can afford? That's the difference between our party and yours, and that's why we will propose this motion today and you will oppose it.
This time last month, the City Tribune carried a story and they reported that a vulture fund, and not just any vulture fund, but the country's largest one, was circling above my home county of Galway. And the Tribune stated, and I quote, that IRES REIT was planning to roll out its highly profitable buy-to-let model, a move that will drive up rents and house prices. Minister, this news wasn't welcomed by anyone who came into my clinic. These are people who are struggling to pay rent, people who've seen just this last week that rents have increased yet again by 19% in County Galway and by 8.8% in Galway City. People fear bills coming through the door. These are people who are served notices to quit by landlords and fear where they're going to go to next. The build-to-rent model of these investment firms just drive up rents and prices, and they're there to serve only the wealthiest in society. And we often hear from this government that it's all about supply, 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 that so long as we're increasing the supply of homes by whatever means, then we can bring down rents. But we know and we've seen that funds are more than happy to let their properties sit idle if they cannot get someone to pay that rent, because they don't want to allow a situation of falling rents, which for them means a falling yield on their asset, and they're happy to maintain a situation of high rents. And Minister, just a few months ago, right outside where I live, right outside my estate in Merview in Galway, one of these build-to-rents was given planning permission for apartments to be constructed just outside of Merview. And I tell you, Minister, the people of Merview were not happy to see that, because once again, the people of Merview will know and they will see that their children, their grandchildren will not benefit from this. They will not be able to pay those rent, and it will just push them further away from home ownership and indeed from even being able to rent. The reality is that your housing policy is destroying generations of young people and older people. And when I hear your ministers telling us that your housing policy is working, I have to say I don't disagree with them. But for me, the operational question is, who exactly is it working for? Who is it benefiting? And that answer, Minister, is these investment funds and the large private developers that are serving them. Because our rental crisis and the rental crisis of the people of Galway is their record profits. Minister, nothing that your government has done has had any impact whatsoever on rising rents. And of course, rising rents aren't just unique to our larger cities and towns. In my own constituency, rents up in County Roscommon by over 22% in the last year. On average now, renters paying €912 and rising every single month. At the same time, every other outgoing in that house has increased as well. In County Galway, 19% increase in rents. They're now surpassed €1,100, with renters paying €1,138 a month and rising. And the government response to this consistently is supply. But renters cannot wait for supply, and they especially cannot wait when the supply is there and an investment fund comes in, takes it up, and that supply is gone. Young people, people of my generation, cannot save a deposit to own their own home. They're now leaving, as they have done previously, because they cannot afford to live in Ireland, and that's a reality. And they are in a position now where they don't want to work just to live. They don't want to work just to pay their rent and pay their bills. They actually want a life. They're young people, they're coming out of college, they're starting work, and we are driving them out of this state, as we have done before. It's not working. It's a sad indictment in 2022 that so many people cannot afford to live in this state. They have good jobs, they're well educated, and they cannot get by. That doesn't make any sense. And what your government have done to date in relation to rents has had no impact whatsoever. We have to support these renters to allow them to work and to live here rather than to leave, like many of my generation have already and unfortunately continue to.
Louise O'Reilly.
There is a cost of living crisis, and it is absolutely hammering low to middle income workers. It's like we keep saying it, but you just cannot hear it, or you hear it and you just don't get it, or you maybe get it but you're not interested in doing anything about it. But you really need to listen and to engage with the opposition minister when we are putting forward solutions. In my own constituency in Fingal, workers are paying more than £2,000 a month to rent a 3-bedroom property in which they are trying to bring up their families, pay for the exorbitant cost of childcare, try to keep a car on the road because, well, you know, public transport is not quite what it should be out my direction. And all they see is prices rising all around them, a secure home getting further and further and further away from them. And they see that that is government policy. And government policy is working, because government policy appears to be to heap more and more pressure onto the backs of ordinary workers until they simply cannot take it anymore. And Minister, I don't know what you see in your clinics or who you see, but in mine, I see people every day of the week who are absolutely desperate for secure housing, and they see your government putting it further and further and further away from them. When I was young Minister, the aspiration of owning a home was not fantastic. It wasn't something that was a pipe dream. It was very achievable for people on ordinary incomes. It isn't. And if that isn't enough for you to realise now that workers are paying the rents that you are ensuring they have to pay, they cannot save for deposits, they are stuck renting. They cannot get out of the rental trap, and the rent is going up and up and up, week on week, year on year, and it is crucifying them.
Minister, this is an ideologically driven housing policy which is not only facilitating the institutional and investment funds, they are in fact being subsidised by the state to the tune of 860 million every year and more. For decades now, your party and Fianna Fáil have undermined the local authorities and young people's ability to rent, to purchase or to build or to live locally. These institutional landlords are in fact competing with the council and with against young couples in trying to purchase homes, to ensure that families live locally, that they can contribute locally, rather they're producing with your say so and with your support, build to rent, which creates transitional, transient communities. It's not a stable society. There is so much state land that can be used also that needs to be built on. In my own area, there's quite a range, and we've told you time and time again. In fact, in some cases, you have rezoned it back to industrial rather than to be used for housing. Such as the chaotic state of your policies. That needs to be built on, and if you started building for young families, for couples, for those who want to rent, affordable rate, then you will allow families to take the burden off their shoulders. We have to ensure that young people, young working families in Dublin City and elsewhere can afford to put a roof over their heads. It is not the case today that they can. Even today, for instance, in Dublin 10, there is not one property available to rent in that part of my constituency. And it's not much better in Dublin 12, where there's only 19 properties. That's because the institutional landlords and the investment funds are buying up properties, sometimes in groups, or sometimes in just one here and one there. And I see you shaking your head. That is a fact. Whether you like it or not, I can bring you to places where they have bought up whole blocks of houses, but where they've also bought up ex-local authority stock, second-hand ones, on the market, competing and driving up the price of those houses, and then changing them into rental properties and driving up the prices also, and then you're subsidising them. That's the scandal, and that needs to end.
The government's failure to adequately address the housing crisis, a crisis of their own creation, has meant that other unsavoury actors have entered the housing market and act with impunity. A classic example is the aptly named Vulture Funds, who swoop into our distressed housing market to look for and buy out housing stocks and portfolios. Investment funds have the advantage of not being subjected to the same constraints as the banks. They have little or no concern at the backlash or negative consequences their actions have on their company's branding, so they are more inclined and more likely to take drastic action to protect their investments. This can mean repossessing homes and evicting people. These companies have one goal, which is to be profitable, and they achieve this by protecting their investments, whether by offering those with a homeowner a write-down or evicting them. The banks win when they sell their loan books to investment funds, because their reputations are not tarnished by being the one who has to evict a homeowner, and they don't like having to offer write-downs to individual mortgage holders, as others on their books with distressed loans might look for a similar resolution to their repayment difficulties. The Vulture Fund does not have these concerns and can do either with a view to what is in the best interests of its investors, despite the enormous damage such investment funds do to Irish society by locking out those seeking to buy a home and forcing renters into paying unaffordable rents. The government is happy to let this continue regardless of the social and economic costs to the country, as long as they can say that housing is available. Vulture Funds buying up large blocks of housing and apartments creates its own monopoly of sorts. These investment funds will be the market drivers, and they will have the leverage by their ownership of vast numbers of apartments and houses in determining market prices. House prices will be and are being driven by these tactics and are no longer affordable, or even to professionals who take in home incomes which are above the national average. This is not sustainable, and we need to ensure that in new housing developments, institutional investment funds are themselves locked out of purchasing in bulk by imposing a stamp surcharge and ending tax exemptions granted by the government. Minister, you're aware that in your own constituency, there beside Campbell's Bridge, there's a huge 15-storey building which has been bought up by an investment fund. So it would be ridiculous to say that you're not aware of what's going on. Thank you.
Minister, the policy of inviting and incentivising investment funds into the Irish housing market has been disastrous for a generation of young people in Ireland. People are in the ridiculous position of trying to compete with investment funds who can come in, swoop in and buy up hundreds or even thousands of homes at inflated prices. This is pushing up the price of housing and contributing to the current shameful situation where for many young people owning a home is nothing but a pipe dream. Fingal and Labour introduced a system that brought these investment funds into the Irish market, awarding them, frankly, outrageous tax advantages and exemptions, including not having to pay corporation tax on income earned from rent. And this has contributed to the dysfunctional, cruel housing market that we have now. It has locked out people struggling to buy their own home, and it's fuelling higher rents. And so here we are, nearly a decade on, dealing with the repercussions of this terrible policy decision. In 2022, working people are finding it almost impossible to house themselves in a way that is affordable and sustainable. People who earn decent pay, who in previous generations would never have struggled to buy a home, are now not able to do so. And we all know why people so badly want to own their own home, because the rental market is absolutely bonkers. Rents are astronomical. They're increasing month on month, year on year, and there's no stability or security of tenure for anybody. And that's if you can find a place to rent. DAF recently reported that the number of properties available for rent is the lowest since they began tracking in 2006. In Louth, rents increased by over 8% in the last year alone. We need to make housing affordable, Minister, and we need to allow our young people to live their lives without the enormous worry and stress of paying for housing hanging over them. Young people aren't able to live normal lives. Living with your parents well into your 20s and 30s isn't normal, nor is it fair, Minister. People are putting off getting married and having children, and of course, many are leaving the country altogether, not because they're unemployed, but because successive governments have made it impossible for them to live here. And Minister, I just can't fathom how you, in all conscience, can continue with these policies, knowing the damage, the stress, the sheer anxiety and the huge financial pressure and burden it's putting on your own people. And most people outside of this bubble are asking you the same question. Why continue with those policies?
Deputy Funch, no. Deputy Crowe and then Deputy Stanley, according to the list I have here.
Minister, you and I know that investment funds are currently spending billions in the Irish property market, and they are hoovering up properties. We also know that workers and their families are locked out of the market and don't stand a chance when some big fund can just buy properties in bulk and offer 30% over the asking price. Minister, it's obscene that big funds pay hardly any tax and are making huge profits at the expense of Irish people. And why is this happening? Because Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have prioritised the profits of investment funds and developers. Let the market decide. Let it run amok with no controls. And who are the victims? It's young couples who come into our advice centres. It's young workers. It's nurses. It's guards, council workers, civil servants, factory workers. The government has made their priorities clear and they're skewed as all the others towards a wealthy elite. The government measures and plans only ever push up the costs of homes, meaning that many workers and their families will be trapped in the rental market. And if this continues, homelessness will increase as more and more workers' incomes flows into rents. Rents and house prices climb and do serious harm to lone parents and others who are disproportionately represented among the homeless and the hidden homeless population. And does anyone seriously believe that the same parties that created the mess will somehow, with a magic wand, go and fix it? I do not believe that anyone trusts Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael to solve the housing problems. Every so-called plan we've seen from this government and previous government we're just another developer's charter. Sinn Fein would end tax breaks for big investment funds, will ensure that local authorities and approved housing bodies are funded to buy some of these developments before they come onto the market, so they can make them available to ordinary people to rent and buy at affordable prices. The housing situation in Ireland is completely dysfunctional. Sinn Fein are committed to building social and affordable housing, implementing rent controls and putting a month's rent back in renters' pockets through a tax credit. So it's time for others to be given a chance to do things differently.
Now, Deputy Gould.
Minister, Taoiseach, a Corkman like myself, has repeatedly tried to play down the damage that is being done by international investment funds in this state by claiming it's only a Dublin issue. It is not only a Dublin issue. My constituents and his own in Cork are having the hopes and dreams of owning their own home dashed by these funds coming in and buying up properties and homes. CSO figures released in October show that in Cork, 1 in 5 Cork City homes are being purchased by non-owner occupiers. Given the state of the housing market, given the out-of-control rents, with an average rent in Cork at the moment of over €1,500 per month, ordinary families and working people don't stand a chance of ever owning their own home while you're in power. The Examiner reported in 2020 that the previous 5 years, institutional investment funds spent over €1 billion in Cork alone. The largest of these being the Elysian building, which cost €90 million in the centre of Cork City. To rent the 3-bedroom apartment, Minister, in the Elysian, you pay now watering €3,448. To pay that a month, and if you were to stay with the recommended of 30% of your income towards your rent, you'd want to earn $250,000. That's the type of housing policy that you've had that's led us to here. Minister, we talk about cuckoo funds, but the only thing about cuckoo funds is your policy, because you must be in cuckoo land if you think this will deliver more housing and cheaper rents. Margaret.
Minister, listen carefully to what you have to say, but the reality is thousands of workers are trapped in private rented accommodation with spiralling rents and no hope of ever getting a mortgage or securing a permanent roof over their heads. Daft.ie figures released last week revealed that rents in Laois went up by 11.3% in 12 months, while Nuffield went up by a whopping 14.6%. And the average purchase cost of a home in 2021 was $225,000. The government has completely abandoned renters and workers earning in the category of 18 to 60,000 in terms of being able to either buy a home or secure a home with secure tenure tenancies. The government budget and the recent announcement delivered no solutions to these housing problems. You fail renters and you fail rural dwellers. Sinn Fein has long called for an immediate rent freeze that we would introduce and provide renters with a tax rebate to the value of 1 month. So give the renters a break. Don't give it to the institutional investors. Why not give it to our own people, to the people who are nailed to the wall, absolutely nailed to the wall every week and every month, trying to figure out where they're going to get the rent? Give them a modest tax break of 1 month's rent back every year. Workers and families need that break, and these two measures would provide some relief, but would also help renters to save for a deposit. And Minister, government spokespersons put a lot of faith in increasing the supply of housing. We want to increase the supply of housing. I know it needs to be increased, but the facts is that increasing supply alone will not bring down rents and will not bring down the price of housing. And all we have to do is look back to 2006 and 2007, when we were building over 90,000 homes a year. What happened? Rents went out to the roof, literally, pardon the pun, and the same with house prices in those 2 years. So supply alone won't do it. It needs other measures. And government, our proposal this evening also calls for an increase in stamp duty and take away the incentives for these vulture funds to buy up bulk buy homes that ordinary families and couples need. End their tax breaks, Minister. Workers and families, and just add this, Workers and families in rural Ireland are also facing huge energy costs, and the measures you brought in last week didn't address this. All they're facing is more carbon tax increases in areas where there isn't public transport. And, you know, really and truly here what you're doing is that you've really done nothing to address the situation for renters and rural dwellers.
Thanks very much, Cathaoirleach. I have 2.5 minutes, so I'll be brief. I want to mention the issue of rents, and obviously loads of people have mentioned that, but it really is, like, I don't even like to use the word crisis point because it's just gone beyond that nearly at this stage. But just both yesterday in the 2 clinics that I run, one in Kilkenny City and one in Bagnallstown, which is in Carlow, I had an individual in each, one actually due to be out of their property this Saturday and one in the next 2 months, and just absolutely no hope of being able to find anything at all. And it's really, really so difficult, and it's really difficult even to know what to say to people sometimes in this situation, because, you know, you're saying, have you applied to various landlords or anything that might be coming up, and everybody's applying to everything. And at the moment there's 10 properties in the whole of Kilkenny and 9 in the whole of Carlow, and then you put into a situation where people are entitled to HAP. For example, if you're a single person, 490 HAP is what you're entitled to. Like, you haven't a hope of reaching some of these properties listed at between 1,100 and 1,500 euro in some cases. So we really, really do need urgency in relation to the rental. And it's not everyone that qualifies for HAP, and I want to make that point too. There's a lot of people in real difficulty that don't qualify for any supports. I want to mention the fuel allowance as well, because this is a major, major issue in relation to the cost of living. And so many people we have seen, particularly elderly people, who should be not worried about the cost of heating, are really, really, you know, under pressure. And there's an awful lot of people that don't qualify for fuel allowance, and I want to mention that in particular too. And one of our suggestions was to include people who are on the work and family payment, for example, and I think we need to look at that. In the longer term as well, I think we need to look at the issue of retrofitting. I know this will be a debate later this week in this chamber, but I just want to make the point, while I have the opportunity, that a lot of the grants that are out there are not fit for purpose. People don't have the balance of the funds, and I think the SEIA have a waiting list of around a year or over a year at the moment, which is crazy for people. So some of the schemes, there's no common sense in them, and they need to really be fit for purpose. And that's, you know, where we should be looking at if we want to long-term reduce costs for people, and also if we really are serious about the climate. They're the kind of schemes that we need to be looking at. I'll finish there, Cathaoirleach, because I know we're short on time.
Thanks very much, Cathaoirleach. Minister, the average rent in my home city of Limerick is €1,407 per month. That's if you're lucky enough to be able to find a property. Today there was 9 properties available on daft.ie. 2 of those houses were for more than €4,000 a month. I don't know who can actually afford that in Limerick. But there's only one house available for less than €2,000 a month. So we have actually priced working families out of the market. They have nowhere to go. They earn too much to get a social support. You refuse to increase the limit of the income limit where people can actually access social supports, whether that be a council house or HAP. You refuse to do that. There's a supposedly a review going on in the department, but any official I've spoken to tells me there is no review going on, or there's no particular review or no time plan on when that's going to be done. Minister Burke referenced, addressing the cost of living, and he spoke about the minimum wage. Yeah, you increased the minimum wage by 3% this year. That's 3%, and inflation is running at 5%, so it's actually a reduction. So you haven't really done anything to help people who are on the very lowest pay. The extreme cost of rent and house purchases has not come out of the blue. It's a result of failure after failure of this government and its predecessors. The refrain we hear most from government parties is that housing is not an issue that can be fixed overnight, but stick with them and they will deliver. We've had 11 years of failure in relation to the cost of housing by these parties, and I think it's time to realise that these parties cannot and will not fix the crisis of their own making. Yesterday, your colleagues in Fingal tried a social media attack on Sinn Fein and your housing policies with which was fairly pathetic attack on social media. So let's get something straight here. Your colleague, constituency colleague of mine, Deputy RD, was quoted in the Sunday Times when talking to investors, social housing, that the government will offer incentives, and in his own words, and I quote, "In this world, everybody has to make a few bob, you know." Money to be made while Irish citizens were locked out of the housing and rental markets. Now, I'm sure Fianna Fáil will produce some more of their pathetic little graphics for social media to suggest that we in Sinn Féin are the problem when it comes to housing, which of course is nonsense. But let's be clear on a few points. The government have not delivered affordable homes to rent or to buy on the scale that is needed. Under this government, both rents and house prices have increased, working families priced out of the market. The tax advantages and exemptions to investment funds were not gifted by Sinn Fein. The rich got richer and made, as Deputy D suggested, more than a few bob. It was under this government's watch that 4,900 private rented sector properties were bulk purchased by investment funds in 2021. My time is up, so I could have contributed more.
Well, Chairperson, in the past hour we've heard the usual excuses in welfare's defence now from government, something that hasn't changed in the years that I've been raising this with them. But I'll tell you something, if there was any investors, any cuckoo funds or vulture funds watching into the contributions made by Minister Paschal Donoghue and Mr Burke, they'll be happy enough anyway, because they know their lads have their back in Fingal, because there's nothing going to change according to the two lads here. Indeed, Minister Paschal Donoghue's speech went as far as to try and convince us all that the vulture funds are poor souls that are just trying to do the best for ordinary renters and home purchasers out there, and we should maybe shed a tear for them. But the reality is something very, very different. And the fact that the Minister for Finance didn't even talk about the fact that they don't pay any corporation tax or capital gains tax shows that there is no defence in terms of the sweetheart deals that he has given and his colleagues have given these funds over the last number of years. One of the myths peddled by the government and again by the Minister this evening is that these funds finance residential developments that would otherwise be built. But this isn't the first time we've heard this. He's said it numerous times before. Indeed, his party leader, the Taoiseach, told the Dáil that the role of these funds is to finance the construction of developments which would not have been built if it not for finance from the investment funds. Such developments were not able to get funding from banks. That's what he told this House. It is blatantly untrue. As Hook and McDonald estate agents noted in a recent Dublin residential investment report, very few institutional investors have funded the development and construction of properties that they bought in the Irish market. That is the truth. Not what Paschal Donoghue is saying, not what Leo Varadkar is saying, not the spin that's coming from this government. Last week we got a report from BNP Paribas, and that found that investment funds bulk purchased 4,900 properties in 2021 alone, and they were paying 32% more than the average asking price. 32% more because they believe that rents are going to stay at the levels that they are. Properties which we know are now being rented out at extortionate price, and they are extortionate, and that is the word for them. But Peter Burke wants us to shed a tear if you would even think of that. They have to pay €400 more, given that they don't pay any tax whatsoever. These funds have more firepower than ordinary workers and families out there. So if you care, then do something about it. They have more firepower, and the problem is that it's not just that. You are making things worse. You have given them more firepower because the policy of the government is to give you the greater advantage over workers and families, and that's the blunt truth about it. There's no hiding place from this here. Even Home Building Finance Ireland, which is wholly owned by the Minister for Finance across the Dáil floor here, it was set up by the government to finance residential development. It has provided €264 million in funding for 5 developments, 916 units that have been or are to be bought up by these same funds. So just get this for a moment. Get this for a moment. We have the taxpayers funding over €250 million to a developer to build homes. Those homes never come on the market. The funds buy them right from the start, agree to buy them. They charge eye-watering rents of €2,000 plus, and all of those million euros that they get from those rental incomes, the Minister for Finance across the floor, and with the support of Fianna Fáil and the Green Party, are saying you do not have to pay 1 cent, not even 1 cent of tax on that. Any other company, any other individual would have to pay a tax on that rental income. But you think that they should have special privilege to boost up rental prices and house prices, allow them to pay over 32% the asking prices, pushing up house prices on everybody, and then you try to convince us that you have at the heart, at the core of your policy is ordinary renters, workers or families. Nothing can be further than the truth, because these policies only serve one purpose, and that is to serve the funds. In May 2020, the Dublin-based investment advisory firm Gillen Markets wrote a note to international investors on our housing market and why it's broken. So this is what they said, and Minister Donoghue knows what they said, but this is what they said. Current housing policy has benefited both institutions and developers at the expense of individual buyers. The aims of institutions is to maximise its rental income from its properties, and developers are also designing apartment blocks to maximise this income for the institutions rather than aiming to meet the needs of society. It went on to say that the current high level of house prices and rents in Ireland's residential property market has been driven in a significant way by government housing policy, with favourable policies attracting institutional investors into the market. It went on to say that their gradual move into the market has contributed to higher housing prices and higher rents. Not my words, not Sinn Fein words. This is the market talking to itself, exposing what you and Fine Gael, what your government has done over the last 10 years. You've rolled out the red carpet, you have given them more firepower to push up prices on ordinary people, and the public can no longer stand for it. It is crazy what is happening. It is crazy what is happening. And people out there, if you really get it, are pleading with you to take away that advantage from the funds. Why and under God would you allow them to be outbidding ordinary families who are desperate and needed for homes? Why would you allow that to do it? You do it every time, but you didn't address that once in your 10-minute contribution, or indeed your 10-minute contribution. Not once did you justify why you allow them to pay no tax, why you allow them to outbid ordinary people, ordinary families, and why they are allowed to push up rents in this city across the board. This motion should be supported by anybody who has the interests of workers and families at heart, instead of those who support the profits of these funds.
So, the debate having concluded, I'm now going to put the question on amendment number 2, which is in the name of the Minister of Finance. The question is that the amendment being made go named for on Lasso. Na chachti ator ar hevna na keshta Aberdeen to. Na chachti ator in a quina Aberdeen Neil. Sheelam Gul on Kesh Rita. In my opinion, the question is carried. Votes all. As the division is demanded, the division is postponed until the weekly division time tomorrow evening.